So my first question is, I'm very impressed about what Australia is doing. So we also invite you to the Netherlands, especially Salah is there been 3, 4 times, I think already, giving presentations, and my colleagues are looking very carefully at what is happening in Australia, more than in the US, for example. So that must be something. How does it come that there is a good interest in agriculture? What helped you? What helped you?
Yeah, I'm happy to pass a comment. I mean, this is nearly the most least digitised industry on the planet. So if you come back to the start from an ag tech point of view, you're talking about something that is wide open for disruption and new business models at the top. And then when you pair it back, you look at the drivers from climatic diversity, no subsidies, highest labour cost in the OECD. It just goes on in terms of that's why Australia, that's why it's a perfect and prime market, and there's a necessity. And we've got some of the most innovative growers in the world that are early adopters, and that's really what's driving it, coupled with the decrease in technology costs.
Okay, but now Salah, especially the technical universities, are digging into the agriculture. That's not happening even in the Netherlands.
So I think what you see there is, you're seeing the market drivers and the issues from the industry, is what Jesse was mentioning. On the other side, you have a country that has, over the last 20 years, been working in field robotics, both in research as well as in commercialisation, so mining, infrastructure monitoring, etc. So there's a lot of know-how and knowledge amongst the universities and on how to deal with automation, especially outdoor robotics, which is very hard, 24 hours, 7 days a week, all weather conditions. So I think it's the need that's happening on one side, but you have the capability as well on the other side, and they're coming together.
Mm. I just want to add one thing. I think Australia also is a perfect test bed, not in the sense of that we have good lands and what it's like we are off season. Like abandoned robotics is a good example. You have 6 months, the rest of the universe, they're harvesting, and then once that's finished, they can come to Australia. Yeah. So we are looking at it from a robotics technology. We are the perfect test bed in a sense that 6 months in a year, they could come here, test stuff, and we're looking,
Okay, good. One other question that raises me is, I see a lot of technology, but it's not implemented yet. Where does it stuck?
Okay, I guess there's going to be many different opinions there. So if you look at, so I'll speak it with the university hat on. If you look at how you've got the push idea, so I like my research, I'll do my research, and the farmer wants it, and I'll just push it into their face until they accept it. And then there's the pull methodology, right? So you go out there, you speak to the growers and see what they look interested in, you start to take it in. You get the same concepts in all the other industries around Australia. The difference is that with the other industries, you generally have a big OEM that sits there, a big company that's sitting there ready to take it on and push it out. While in agriculture, you have many different growers that you have to deal with. So there's this gap in between by saying, well, I've got this technology to a certain level, what do I do with it then? And who's going to take over that risk? Of, as I was showing you in that plot before, you get to a level of TRL 6 or 7, who's going to take that risk of then pushing it out and making it work for the growers? And that in agriculture is a little bit harder than what you would find in the other industries, which is probably why, as Jesse was saying before, you get a lot of different companies and you've got to look into them a little bit closely and see what they're doing. But you have got some companies there that they've been backed and whatever might be by bigger players, and they're taking the risk in terms of turning that forward, and that's really what we've got to wait for, I think, in the agriculture industry.
Yes, as industrial, can you respond to that?
It's really interesting, and I think there's a few things at the moment. I think the business models just aren't clear. So I think in a lot of cases the way in which we will adopt the technology, that the market failure is very clear, that the technology is addressing, that it's come from a real ground up problem and been co-created with the users that will take it. There's some missing pieces in there with depending on who you're referring to or which company or which approach. And then there's this sort of perpetual debate also about is the industry ready in parallel? We've got, and I'd love to hear what you guys think, but it's always, is it the system, do you build the system around the technology around the growing system, or do you change the growing system for the technology? And there's a little bit in parallel, but unquestionably, let's take the abundant robotic one I spoke about at the moment. Currently, I would say I don't know, help me Kevin, less than 1% of Australian orchards could handle that technology and adopt it right now. So the issue there is not necessarily the technology, it's smart, it's progressive, it's doing everything it needs to do, it's hit a clear pain point, it's labour, it's 40-50% cost for these guys for harvest. But the adoption will be a real challenge because you just can't, there's not many orchards that just could grab it and take it right now. So in parallel, if that's not being worked up, or do you come back in the other direction and put the pressure back on the tech and the companies and say, well, you've gone down the wrong road, haven't you? That's not a scalable business model if you've picked out a niche angle, come up with something that is more suitable to deal with the complex systems, the problems we've got now that actually will allow us to get down the road where we can take these systems, but be prepared for now a much more complex piece of technology that'll take longer to develop and will be a lot more expensive. So it's tricky.
The feeling I have that there is a lot of technology. There's also good, there are agricultural boards that fund your kind of project, so I think that's very good. But is the farmer directly engaged enough? Are there farmer heroes that do the precision agriculture, get enough value out of it, and are they also placed as a hero into the communication outside? How is that organized here? Could you
I mean, we have, as you said, we have great funding agency and RDCs in Australia that does manage that interaction. And as technology, we often get to go out and talk to them and showcase. And as Salah was mentioning, like going around and showing it's real in action. But I guess they become the question of that, the scalability, and it works with one farm, it works with one crop. But then if you want to make it the viable business model, it needs to be scalable. And I guess that's where if we saw the majority of the technology push happens in broadacre, not because it was easy thing to fix, because it was when you fix it in cotton, it could be done on wheat. It could be done on so many other things, the same problem more or less, but then apple versus mango, it's a different issue.
Yeah, I think we need to be mindful of the remit is different, or the mandate for someone that's under a funded project model versus working with a perhaps commercial startup with a different set of priorities in terms of the way that they would both need or should engage. And so you're often you can be shackled in some cases to do just what you've been asked to do, and in other cases perhaps you've got a little bit more freedom. But unquestionably, I use this, keep saying this co-creation. If it's not done like that from the start with the clear pain point being addressed, it's destined to trip over.
But I think it's a long-term. Yeah. We all know that robotics is coming, right? So you've got to go through this process of knowledge gain and sharing. So, universities and startups and institutes need to learn what it means to work on a farm, and the industry needs to learn about what technologies are available. So you might not see it now. It's going to happen. The cost of the technology keeps dropping, becomes easy to use, becomes a lot more modular. We start to do that. And to go back to your other question, all the RDCs are running their programs and ensuring that there's some engagement from the end users into that program.
Okay, one final question before we go to the audience. What needs to be done to make this a success, Jesse? One sentence. Try to reduce it to one sentence.
Can you reframe the question?
What needs to be done to make precision agriculture and robotics as a success in Australia? One sentence.
We need more investment, unquestionably, which I hope people like Bosch and others can bring. So we need more investment because robotics it's a slow burn, and we need to manage expectation.
That's your question. Salah.
Yeah.
That's one sentence. That's already three.
Fail.
Salah, one sentence.
Stick to the path. It's a long game.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we need to design future of farms.
Yeah. Yeah, and disseminate this whole idea, and let's show that it works. Yeah. Okay. So farmers here in the audience, what do you need to start the robotics? Who could respond on that one, and who does have a question? I see some remarks here at the back. Is there a microphone? Yeah, well, give it to one. That one is the closest. I will have you in mind. Yes.
My question is just about commercialisation. There's a lot going on. Are we 1 year away, 3 years away, 5 years away? From simple weeding, robots, those sorts of things. What's it look like? What do you think?
It depends probably about the application, but where are you working on? So this sounds as you are waiting.
So my example would be in the vegetable industry, and we saw examples before of just simple processes like robotic weeding, spraying, those sorts of things. I can see an application on my farm for that right now. So how long away is commercialisation where I can buy something off the shelf?
So to be very specific on that, I showed before the TRL aspects. So autonomous weeding is a no-brainer now for not just what we do, but for lots of different startups and institutions around the world. And being able to demonstrate it routinely 24 hours is fine. That's been coming out of the institutions as well. Putting it in an operational context, and as Jesse was mentioning before, making sure that that equates to a proper return on investment for the farmer is the part that needs to happen. From a technology perspective, it's ready to kind of feed out. We've already, I mean, in Switzerland already, there's just been another startup that's received $15 million Series B or whatever it might be to actually look at autonomous weeding in that. So there's lots of applications, the technology's there. It's really taking it outside of the labs or outside of startups into a operational context, showing it over 24/7 and making sure that there is a proper return on investment for the farmer for that. We've in the project that we had before, that I showed you before, we have some ag economists that sit on board and look at the economic framework, and you'd be surprised that there is a point where autonomous weeding just doesn't work for farmers. It's something else that needs to be happening as well. So it's working at that right value proposition for the farmer. But the technology's there, it's ready to kind of fall out.
Can I make a quick comment on that? So yeah. I've had very little to do with robotics in vegetables, but if you said right now that there was a prototype that had proved out its business case and that it had the technology and it was refined and it was ready to go at the prototype stage, and I don't want to put a cold spoon on this because I'm as passionate as everyone else about this and want to see this stuff ubiquitous, but conservatively expect a 2 to 3 year industrialisation, commercialisation phase before that's in your hand. However, the preface to that comment is the really rotten stuff that we don't want to talk about, like the regulatory side. How do we ensure it? Can you run it on your farm? What happens if it doesn't work and it goes across the road and a car swerves around it? And at the moment, you can't even spray. You couldn't spray using something that's autonomous at the moment. The label doesn't allow it. So there's all these boring, horrible discussions that we don't want to have yet. And I don't want to deregulate ourselves out of an industry before it even starts. But to give you perspective, and you've asked how long, if something was ready to go and ready to scale, it's years. And please correct me if I'm wrong if you guys think differently, but there's a whole lot of fishhooks still left in this.
I think differently. So.
That's good.
I guess the positive example was Blue River Technology. So yeah, of course, robots that does the weed, different issue. You're right, maybe. Yep. But then back of the tractor.
I'm not talking mechanical.
Yeah, so I mean, that was a positive, and that's already commercialized and it's.
Yep. So if that's the case, why would you not use Blue River's technology?
It's not available here.
But didn't you say it's available?
No, it's available in the US. It's not.
It's available in the US. Would you use it if it was in Australia?
I think what you'll find is what becomes cost effective is that you need it to do weeding, but at the same time you need some other value add aspects to it as well. That's when it will, you'll demonstrate that instead of a return on investment in 3 years, it'll come down to 1 because of crop intelligence and because of a whole bunch of things. And so it's really working out what that is. We could take any one of the platforms that I showed you before, rip out 3/4 of the sensors and the batteries and make it really light, and it will just go up and down and do weeding. Whether that makes it cost effective or not for you is a difference. It needs to go out into a startup phase. It needs to be able to think about it. My feeling is that it's 1 to 2 years, not 2 to 3 years, only because the way we do
it's a German company, we're conservative.
That's right. The way we do robotics now, everything's off the shelf. You put it together, you can kind of build it robust, and you can really drive the cost down low. But it's really from the economics to a farmer perspective that we need to look at.
Okay, let's go to a next question. I had a question here in front.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, wait until the microphone is so that everyone can hear you. We can hear you,
we
so
don't
that's
normally
good.
have a problem here, can we? Yeah.
Yes.
So just thinking back over the period of time, I should preface this by saying I've been involved with at least 2 of these people in previous lives. So what brings the farmer to the position that Jesse quantified before is that do we rebuild the system or do we modify the machinery? The closer you get to the machinery, the faster the farmer modifies the farm. Now, whilst we all thought robotics was just around the corner in the year 2000, some people changed their farms for robotics about that time. And as it gets closer, the farms will change faster. The problem is in perennial horticulture, if you start a program on a financial basis to change a farm, it takes 20 years. So anybody in the audience that's thinking about robotics in 3 or 5 years' time, get out and change your farm, because you're not ready. It's not the robotics, it's not ready, you're not. In the field crops, big difference. It's all reasonably flat and it's easy to work. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you for the comment. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think it's right. And
and
in the veggie space, you can get many more iterations in a year, and you can make modifications. You know, might be, I don't know, there's probably someone from Werribee in here. I think I might be looking at a guy, maybe 10 or 12 weeks. How long's a lettuce crop in Werribee in the middle of summer? 8 weeks? 10 weeks? Something like that. You've got an opportunity to go, actually now we'll go slightly wider on a bed or higher, and it makes this machine more accessible, but perennial's a different game. And if you're not already moving towards a simple, narrow, accessible, productive canopy that will allow for these other things to come in, then you should be doing it anyway. But yeah, you've got to start in tree crops for sure.
It needs to have a good look at, because you have technology getting better and better, more sophisticated. We're getting soft robotics now coming through the game, and that's going to change the way we can do manipulation and a whole bunch of things. So you've got to look at what that technology curve looks like and map that on top of how long will it take me before I have a farm that's ready for automation. What we do know is that the more you can architect any environment and make it more structured, the easier it is for robotics to work in there. So as an industry, if you can sit down and say, we're going to go down that path, and that's what we'll do. So one of the, you could probably architect a farm so much that it drops in yield, but that's not important because the economics works out better because now you're automating, and you've got to model that process in there as well. But as you know, the first time we went into your farm, it was an eye-opener compared to other apple farms that we went on. It just made it so much easier to do automation because you had just a trellis type architecture. It just worked. And you could also see what would happen if you cut them down a little bit further, architect them a little bit more so that you just had all the flowers and all the apples on one face, et cetera, et cetera. So you go down that path, it makes robotics easier now, but you've got to couple into what Jesse was saying before. If it takes me 5 years before I can get a robot on your farm, then maybe it calls for a different architecture anyway from there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one question there.
G'day. What level of collaboration have you had with growers with specific projects? I mean, what level of input from growers can you get to achieve an outcome?
Okay.
Yeah, so it's very direct. So we do have one project with Hort Innovation that we're running with Queensland DAF and CSIRO. That is basically we have grower engagement every few months with demo or presentation and getting feedback in terms of a form or face-to-face and so on. And in other cases, it's come back to the technology, because what the concept in technology is what we use the word MVP or minimum viable product. You need to test it somewhere. Of course, we do it in a lab, as Salah was showing, but when you go down, it needs to be in the actual setting. So you need to go to a farm, you need to go somewhere and kind of convince that person. And that's the cycle needs to be within the cycle of the season harvest. Otherwise, there's no point of having a robot that does something harvesting or whatever, that there's no fruit on the tree.
Yeah, my question's about narrowing the scope a little bit, because it seems like there's you're trying to do a lot of things with the same platform, but maybe a more concentrated effort with a specific type of operation may get an outcome sooner.
So whenever you get funding from any of the RDCs, they all make sure that there's an end user engagement process that's happening. So you can define whatever research you want and how you're going to drive the technology, but you have to have a board of growers that are sitting there overseeing the research program. So you generally find that now across the board. I see where your question's coming from, because we've tackled that from the vegetable industry, so the bots that I showed you before. And it's an interesting question. Do you optimize the platform so much that it works specifically in that environment, knowing full well that if you could broaden it a little bit more, you will drive down the cost of the robot anyway as well for a broader sector. So it's this game that you need to play about understanding how much do you optimize it. Do I make a specific robot that deals just with lettuce, for example, and that's it, and I could optimize it, it's going to be 100%, it's going to be great, but then it just works on lettuce farms. I can't even go to a cauliflower farm or anything like that. And it's trying to figure out how much of that modularity you can work into a system so that you can broaden it, because at the end of the day, it's going to be more cost effective for the industry. The Ripper robot that I showed you on the vegetable farm, we've also modified it and taken to an apple farm. And the whole idea being is that if you can start to see what would happen across that whole broad spectrum of industry, you'll reduce the cost of the bot. So it's a game that you've got to play and dealing with the economics at the same time.
And what could you advise the growers to get more engaged in these kind of developments?
Okay, so at least on, not to show on the other, at least on our projects, every time we do field trials, there's also field days as well, and we bring in growers from around the area to it. They have a look at the system. We partner with RMCG, who then do a communication strategy, a survey strategy, so that gives us the feedback into what we should be doing next. And every time we do a trial, we're always updating what we show on the platform based on the previous user feedback that we get.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one last question. Wait for the microphone, then everyone can hear the question. Yeah, there it is.
I guess the question is more about the adaptability of the technology. We as growers have got very good at employing engineers, whether they're software engineers, whether to build our own equipment. And I mean, we've got on our own farm, we've got processing lines using using software and so forth. And that question, the answer you just had there, where you're saying, customising the farm, and we could use tomorrow a weeder that didn't even have solar panels on it, charged up overnight, and pretty much doing one or two tasks. As you said earlier, a lot of this technology is off the shelf. How difficult is the technology, the driverless technology, that kind of stuff to actually do? Do we need to have a lot of expert partners to get that going, or is that something a few growers get together and do it? Like, that's kind of the gap that we couldn't do ourselves.
Yeah, I guess a way of looking at it is that I could open source everything, and you could look at all the technical designs and all the software designs, and you could say, I could hire a couple of software engineers and a mechatronics engineer and off-the-shelf componentry, and I'll build it just for me and my friends, and I'll do that every 1 or 2 years. Every time it breaks apart and falls apart, I don't really care, right? And go from there. And the difference between that is then you look at it from a commercial perspective. To do that properly, you don't open source it. You've got to kind of close it. And then you've got to make it more broad so it works not just for weeding, but for crop intelligence across a broad spectrum in order to get the value proposition back. And it's an interesting debate, because it then comes down to what do you do with what is the right thing for the industry in that space. I don't believe the technology is hard and it would only work for you and maybe the top 1% of growers to be able to sit down and go, I'll hire a couple of software engineers from the local university as well as a mechatronics engineer out of the robotics department to build myself a little weeder. I don't think it'll be difficult, given the knowledge that we have now. You've got DIY drones that you can go on the website now, and this is the hardware you buy, here's the software you download, this is how you build it, this is how you 3D print it, go fly your own drone tomorrow. And it's all there. So you can do that, but it would be for a very select few. And whether there's a value proposition commercially, I don't know.
I just add one thing, like, I mean, I don't know what smartphone you have, but just imagine you build your smartphone yourself. You're not going to throw it away. But since now you're buying it, is that we are more open to change it to the newer version with the new apps and new software, and VR and AR now is built in. So the same thing happening. I think we have to start thinking about different business models, although I think that's doable today, you can do it, but is it really viable? Like what happened, the laser that you saw in that one slide that I showed, within 3 years, because of the force of driverless car, the laser price gone from $20,000 to $6,000. Just imagine you own that piece of kit 3 years ago. What are you going to do with it? It's useless, it's not the same spec. Of course it works, but it's not perfect. We better start talking about service model.
But I think in your case, I'm assuming, I would be having a software engineer that would do a whole bunch of software activity on my farm, including the data analytics and whatever. In which case, yeah, so what if I bought the sensor for $20,000? If it becomes $6,000 in 2 years, I'll just buy that one. So all I am is being a system integrator for a bot on my farm. And I think in that particular case, it would work, right, in that scenario.
Okay.
And my turn.
Yeah, your last turn. Yeah, you're right. Correct.
I always have the last one, right?
You waited for that one.
Yeah, that's right. No, I to a point agree, like that is all possible, but I would say concentrate on what you're good at, right? Your core business, and I almost can't think of examples where people that step outside of what they're good at end up being good at the thing they thought they were going to be good at. It's so hard. It's the things that could happen on a daily basis that now distract you. I mean, growers have got less bandwidth than they've ever had to make decisions and process information. I think that could come at a point, and there's little things like, FarmBot.io that you can now, it's a 3D printed kit you can have at home. You set up your sleepers, you put it in, you bolt it on top, and this thing goes up and down and weeds and feeds and fertilises. This stuff exists. Kit's off it's not a scalable kit, but in terms of I can see where we're heading. But right now, I would firmly advise you against bringing that sort of capability in-house to do a really specific thing, because by the time you get across that, learn about it, integrate, even with good people and finding those people and getting them on farm, like you say, the change in a bit of tech or the next thing that's available. And we're only talking too about the stuff we know about. Like, think about the other companies that are doing things we don't even know about yet that are about to announce it. And I get the passion and the desire to want to grab it and run, but I would say have some caution and some patience. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's finish here. The guys are here a few minutes probably to ask questions outside of this meeting.